More weather updates throughout the night. Now back to Fox News reporting your secret's out, already in progress.
Life. Yet, when each of these rules was passed, someone believed this rule, that rule, this is necessary. It's going to make us safer. This one is going to make the marketplace more fair. And so they keep passing more. Thousands of new pages every year. Doesn't any politician see that there's a problem with that? Well, yes, finally, for the first time in my career, some politicians get it. And one is the new senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson. What made you get it?
What made me get it? Well, certainly I lived my life under regulations in the private sector, so I saw the harm the government can actually do, not only to business, but job creation and those middle-income individuals that President Obama says he's always wanted to protect. So no, I mean, government regulation is necessary. It can be helpful, but far too often it just flies in the face of common sense. And of course, the thing we really need to be more concerned about in a free society is an all-powerful government that actually can ruin lives. And that's really what I'm trying to point out is the victims of government.
All right, well, let's talk about when it's necessary in a moment. But your background may explain why you care about this. You, unlike so many politicians, you weren't a lawyer by trade. You ran a business. You were in the plastics business.
A manufacturer, right.
And I can't imagine what kind of regulations you ran up against, but you saw how any bureaucrat could torture you.
Absolutely, and John, now that I'm here and I see businesses come in day after day talking about this regulation or that regulation, basically putting them out of business. And what government regulators don't understand is the law of diminishing returns. So some of these regulations may be appropriate, but it goes well beyond common sense and does real harm to businesses, which means it does real harm to job creation, since there's real harm done to real people.
So for your Victims of Government website, you made a little movie about one victim, a man from Granite City, Illinois, who finally took action to fight floods in his neighborhood.
Granite City, Illinois has suffered severe flooding since the 1950s. More than once, the White House declared the area a disaster. The Corps issued study after study after study, yet the Corps did nothing.
Until a Granite City man decided to take a bold step. He never thought working on his own property would cost him almost everything.
And what do you mean cost him almost everything?
Well, he almost went bankrupt. Basically, he could not develop the land at all for 23 years.
For 23 years, your movie goes on to explain that when that Illinois man tried to obey the government's regulations, the EPA told him he needed to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers.
Steve invested another $200,000 to apply for this permit. That was 14 years ago. The permit never arrived. 23 years later, after buying the dump at the end of his street, Steve is on the verge of bankruptcy. What difference does government intrusion make? For Steve and his family, everything.
More than a dozen years waiting for the permit. We called the Corps of Engineers. They say, we followed correct policy and procedures to enforce the law, worked extensively with him and our partner agencies. They're comfortable with this slow death.
Well, absolutely. These laws are written. They give regulators all the power, and the regulators take the power. And so even though Stephen Lathrop did everything right, he got all the necessary state and local permits. He tried to comply with every rule and regulation. He did comply with every rule and regulation, but there's always just a little bit of wiggle room for the regulators, and that's what's so absurd about this. In 8 studies, the Army Corps basically recommended turning that dump into a lake or channels to mitigate flooding. And by the way, if they would have done it, it would have cost $4 million. Stephen Lathrop did it for $100,000. The flooding did stop. But then the Corps comes back and says, you know what, Stephen, that was a wetland. You turned a wetland into a lake. Shame on you. And then they start threatening him. And that's just the problem with an all-powerful government. Americans are basically at government's mercy. They become the victims of government, and we see that time and time again across all the agencies.
And you earlier said there's some things that need regulation. What? Why do the feds need to regulate?
Well, listen, I think food and drug safety, I think transportation safety, vehicle safety. We actually do have to monitor airplanes in the sky. I think most Americans are environmentalists. I think some common sense environmental regulations do make sense. But again, when you have the EPA that regulates ozone, gets it down to 75 parts per million. We do that successfully, and then I guess you got an ozone department there going, well, we completed that, now what should we do? I know, let's knock it down to 65 parts per million at a cost of about $1 trillion over 10 years. Again, it just gets beyond the point of diminishing returns, and government just is not very good at interjecting any kind of common sense in terms of what it does. It just follows these rules. They follow them to the letter. Regulators are very risk averse. Let's face it, their job is regulating things, and so they keep looking for more things to regulate at great harm to our economy and at great harm to individuals.
Thank you, Senator Ron Johnson. Good luck with your Victims of Government campaign. I hope other politicians will start paying attention to these victims. But since most of them don't, it's good that we have groups like Flow. Its website says they're devoted to liberating the entrepreneurial spirit. Michael Strong is CEO of Flow. He's an entrepreneur himself, and so is his wife, Magat Wade. You learned about this when you started at a charter school.
Indeed. Charter schools are designed to create innovation in the public school system. In the third year of operation, our charter school is ranked 36th best school in this country, but we were
36th best in the country.
But we were
in New Mexico, not known for great education.
Exactly. But we were constantly being attacked by regulators. At one point, the toilet roll holders were deemed to be 6 inches too low, and they threatened to shut down the school. This was a direct attack by the public school district. They wanted to attack us, so they sicked the regulators on us to shut us down.
You didn't have the right file folders in a file.
At one point in an audit, we were dinged because there were a certain number of file folders. Might have been 8. I don't even remember. We get dinged on an audit for nothing.
Now, Magat, you run a skincare company, and you're from Senegal. So you've seen, I mean, in some ways, I guess you could say it's a good part about America. Most of Africa is worse.
Yes, I think it's very counterintuitive for most people when they think just in the makeup room. I was talking to a lady doing my makeup, and she was like, oh, really? You're going to talk about regulations in Africa? I tend to think that there is not enough regulation. Maybe that's why it's such a mess. And I said, it's the whole opposite, as a matter of fact. We have so many regulations where we're being strangled.
Just starting a business is almost impossible because you have to bribe people, you have to get 1,000 permits?
Well, let's just take the situation of Senegal. You have at least 10, 12 different entities that you have to go to get things done. And at each level, it's one more room for someone to block you so they can get bribes from you, which delays us. And also the cost. Here in 10 minutes, I can set up an LLC. I'm sitting in the comfort of New York State, and I'm setting up an LLC in Delaware. Done within 10 minutes.
Delaware is the easiest.
Delaware being the easiest, more friendly to businesses. And within 10 minutes, it's done. It's almost free to do it. In Senegal, you're talking months and months and months of operations, thousands of miles of going from office to office to office, and a few $1,000s to get things done. Not everybody can do that.
So one more modern, accessible example of this, eBay. What happened there, Michael?
Well, with eBay, France wanted to license it as if it was a real auctioneer, and there's a long licensing process.
So eBay already existed in America. They just started doing it. But France says
you need to have a license as an auctioneer because it's an auction. And it took much longer to get the eBay going in France because of this. I always like to think
3 years of dispute.
Exactly. When you're starting a business, you don't have time to mess around. eBay is now one of the largest economies on earth, and had every country had all of these obstacles, we might not have eBay. I always think, extraordinary difference.
And the assumption in America is that these regulations are needed to protect consumers from your entrepreneurial greed and to protect us from the big businesses. You say that's a myth.
In almost every case, the big guys use regulation to keep the small guys out.
They can afford the lawyers and the compliance departments, and they're happy if that keeps small entrepreneurs like you out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, I oftentimes fight with the ILO because of these...
Fight with the who?
The ILO, the International Labour Organization. I take a country like Senegal, where it is literally impossible for me to fire an employee. Whether the employee is doing their job or not, it's the combatant road to get rid of an employee who is stealing from you, not doing their work, and rotting the yeah, it's impossible.
And this is because the labor unions have persuaded the government to pass laws saying if you fire someone, you must show us this documentation, or
Yes.
what stops you? Just fire the person.
The laws are so complicated that before you can fire anyone, it's almost impossible to fire anyone, legally speaking, without having to pay, which raises the cost of doing business. So result is, I like to say, if I can't fire you, I can't hire you. It is that simple.
Thank you, Magat and Michael. Later, new ways to save money when traveling, and also to earn money from your own house.